Yeah.
I think.
Okay, good day to you all, especially to those who
We lost you, Lou, or I lost you.
From as Alan just can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now it looks, yes, go for it. Not anymore.
Hello? Okay, sorry. No, good. Okay, that's strange. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Now,
Okay.
yes.
No, I don't have much to say except probably a personal story to share that some of you, probably Sean, would remember this. Some years ago when I was sitting in a meeting in the WTO, I think it was Annabelle and also James and some others, and we were discussing investment and possible negotiation in WTO or elsewhere. Now, I said in that meeting room that WTO should do something on investment. Otherwise, it will be done somewhere else. So I think that's what I said. So today I'm glad to share with you. You all know that Sofia and his Korean colleague coordinator has done excellent
We lost you again.
Including the investment facilitation agreement on development. Now over to you, Cristián. I think I got connection public here.
Okay, that's perfect. And thank you, Lou, and thank you, FMG colleagues, for the really timely discussion on investment facilitation for development. Yeah, announced on July 6th, after 3 years, or around 3 years of negotiations and following discussions that started around 2016 or so. We are now, faced with the agreement, of course, on investment facilitation for development. I think Lou told a war story, and I think many of us in this room will have, some war stories in terms of how this investment facilitation discussion started at WTO. At the moment, I was working with Sean Bohert, who was here on the call at the World Economic Forum, also with Jonathan Fried and another group of people here represented. And I remember this was 2016, and we started a collaboration with the Netherlands on a trajectory for investment facilitation for development. And I'm sure, again, many of us, around those times in which this was crafted, were pushing different instances, which in the end, as things at WTO really turn real when they're picked up by delegations, right? Then around 2018 or so, we already had, established negotiations, and the country which is very dear to my heart, which is Chile, assumed the co-coordination with Korea of negotiations at the WTO on this agreement on investment facilitation. So fast forward 5 years again, and we have, the WTO Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement with around 110 participating members, and a clear roadmap for incorporation, expansion, and support to LDCs towards MT13. The agreement's core objectives are to promote greater developing and LDC member participation on global investment flows, on fostering sustainable investment and fostering sustainable development. And it's structured really around a number of objectives. These are improving transparency of investment-related measures, streamlining the administrative procedures relating to investment activities, promoting domestic regulatory coherence and international cooperation between home and host economies, providing technical assistance and capacity buildings to LDCs, emphasizing the role of fostering sustainable investments for sustainable development. And innovatively, the agreement also includes provisions on responsible business conduct and on measures against corruption, notably on its Section 6 on sustainable investment. So to distill this today, we're very fortunate to have no other the Ambassador of Chile, Ambassador Boza, which will be opening up the panel, and she will be followed up by another key player in the negotiations, represented by China's Deputy Permanent Representative, Yihong Li. We will then be followed by 2 friends that were also, and have been also external stakeholders in the process. FMG member Hamid Mamdouh, who at the time from his chair as director of the services, and as he always used to remark, and investment division at the WTO, oversaw the birth of this process from the organization. And of course, James Zhan, who at UNCTAD has become a truly global reference for FDI, not just on investment facilitation, but also on all aspects of the international investment regime. So really, I'm super excited to be moderating this conversation on the agreement. And with that, and no further ado, Ambassador Boza, it's an honor for us, to have you that had the responsibility basically and to wrap up these agreements only a few weeks ago. So if we can start with your remarks. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the introduction. And yes, we are very happy. We are in the very interesting moment for this agreement right now, because as you know, delegations participating in the IFD initiative concluded the negotiations on the text of the IFD agreement 3 weeks ago on 6 July. And I would like to take this very timely opportunity to debrief you on the state of play on the IFD agreement and the next steps that we are envisaging. However, let me start with some background, even if some elements have been mentioned, and I know that much of you are very aware about this initiative. But as has been already mentioned, the IFD initiative was initiated by a group of developing and LDC members in April 2017. These members recognized the increasing interlinkages between trade and investment, as well as their mutually reinforcing role in fostering global development and inclusive growth. After over 2 years of preparatory work, the negotiations were formally launched in September 2020, aiming to develop an agreement on investment facilitation for development in the WTO. Since the outset, discussions about market access, investment protection, or investor-state dispute settlement have been always off the table. And these 3 disciplines are now explicitly excluded from the IFD agreement. Rather, as has been already mentioned, investment facilitation in the WTO should be understood as creating a more transparent, efficient, investment-friendly business climate by making it easier for domestic and foreign investors to invest, conduct their day-to-day business, and expand their existing investments, as well as for host and home governments to work cooperatively and in mutually beneficial ways to facilitate not only more, but also better investment. Unlike other WTO agreements, the IFD agreement is not about making concessions to other members, but really about making domestic investment regulatory systems and procedures more transparent and streamlined, and therefore more attractive to foreign as well as domestic investors. More and more delegations have joined the IFD initiative since 2017, and currently over 110 WTO members participate in the pro-multilateral negotiations on IFD, including approximately 80 developing countries, of which 20 are LDC members. This shows the wide-reaching acceptance the IFD initiative has gained. Now on the state of play, as I mentioned, back in December last year, delegations participating in the negotiations set themselves an objective, concluding the negotiations on the text of the agreement by July 2023. Indeed, on 6 July, IFD participants announced the conclusions of the negotiations on the text of the IFD agreement. This represents a momentous achievement after only 3 years of negotiations, which I believe clearly illustrates the importance and relevance of the disciplines included in the IFD agreement. The finalized text is composed of 7 sections. I will skip sections 1 and 7 as they are not about the substance, but let me give you a brief overview on what is on sections 2 to 6. Section 2 focuses on transparency of investment measures and includes provisions on the publication of relevant investment measures, including international investment agreements to which members are signatories. Participants are also encouraged to make available investment-related measures on a single information portal where practicable. Section 3 addresses streamlining and speeding up administrative procedures and contains several good governance disciplines aimed at improving the efficiency of members' investment-related administrative procedures and facilitating the applications for investment authorizations, notably through the acceptance of authenticate copies in lieu of originals, the acceptance of electronic submissions for applications for authorization, and allowing electronic payment of fees collected by relevant authorities. Section 4 on focal points, domestic regulatory coherence, and cross-border cooperation includes different provisions on regulatory coherence and cross-border cooperation on investment facilitation. It also contains provisions on the establishment of focal points to assist investors in obtaining relevant information. Section 4 also includes disciplines on the establishment of databases of local suppliers, including micro and small enterprises, to aid investors easily locate relevant domestic suppliers for their investment activities. Section 5 is a key section of the IFD agreement, as it addresses special and differential treatment. This section, modeled on the SDT provisions of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, includes a range of flexibilities for developing and LDC members, which will notably allow them to self-categorize their different obligations contained in the agreement in one of three categories, A, B, or C, depending on the time and technical assistance support that they need to implement them. Hence, this mechanism will allow them to implement the agreement at their own pace while receiving the technical assistance and capacity building they need to do so. The purpose is to ensure that everyone can fully implement the IFD agreement and therefore reap its full benefits. And finally, Section 6, entitled Sustainable Investment, is another key pillar of the IFD agreement. This section includes provisions on responsible business conduct and measures against corruption, which is something very, very new at the WTO. So I think it's very relevant to highlight. Let me talk about a little bit about the next steps. The conclusions of the negotiations on the text of the IFD agreement is a remarkable achievement, of course, but it does not represent the end of the process. Now that the text is finalized, a new phase will begin after the summer break. In this new phase, as laid out in the July 2023 statement by the co-coordinators, which is available for everyone, IFD participants will intensify their work following four parallel complementary tracks, namely, first, advance the discussion on legal incorporation. Second, increase outreach efforts towards all WTO members. Third, intensify support to the investment facilitation needs assessment process for developing and LDC members. And fourth, complete final refinements to the agreement's text, including textual adjustments and ensuring technical coherence and language consistency. With that, let me conclude by saying a few words on why these negotiations are particularly important for developing countries and why the agreement is not simply called investment facilitation, but investment facilitation for development. There are three main reasons, I believe. The first reason is that the IFD agreement is about attracting more investment, particularly FDI, which, as you know, is fundamental in boosting developing members' economic growth, production, and industrialization. The second development aspect is that the IFD agreement is not only about attracting more investment, but also about attracting higher quality investment, fully aligned with the development priorities of each country. As I said before, the IFD agreement contains provisions on sustainable investment, addressing responsible business conduct and measures against corruption. This could be the first in the WTO, and as such, the future IFD agreement could help countries promote sustainable development in all three dimensions, economic, social, and environmental, and contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Finally, my last point is that the future IFD agreement is designed to benefit particularly developing and LDC members. And this objective is materialized in the text by the comprehensive section on special and differential treatment. So I would also like to encourage those delegations that might be attending this meeting, this webinar, that are not participating in the IFD negotiations to join this process especially those from developing and LDC members. So thank you very much for the attention. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much, and thank you very much for outlining both the objectives and also, very importantly, the next steps we're eagerly waiting for as we build up towards MC13. Next on the line, it's Deputy Permanent Representative Li that will bring us the view from China in these negotiations.
Thank you, Cristián, and thank FMG for inviting me to this discussion with very professional and experienced experts. As mentioned, China was one of the initiators on IFD, and we are very excited to see the conclusion of this text negotiation. I would like to start by having a quick look on those key milestones of this initiative. So since in September 2016, G20 summit adopted G20 guiding principles for global investment policy making. Though this happened outside the WTO, it gave WTO people the hope that there may be the possibility for us to bring investment topic back to WTO. Actually, during China's presidency of G20 that year, even before the adoption of this document, we already had discussions on this with some interested members, including whether it could be possible to revitalize WTO Investment Working Group. In April 2017, Friends of Investment Facilitation for Development, with 10 developing members, submitted a proposal to establish the WTO informal dialogue on IFD. Then in May 2017, FFMG launched the informal open-ended discussion. The dialogue was expected to include a set of workshops, seminars, and technical discussions with the aim of providing a platform to informally discuss without prejudice on how the WTO could possibly contribute to facilitating investment. Among them, one event was extremely extraordinary. That is, in November 2017, a high-level forum on trade and investment facilitation for development was held in Abuja, Nigeria. This forum really helped African countries better understand the IFD initiative. A number of countries expressed their interest in the meeting and then later joined the initiative. In December 2017, 70 co-sponsors issued a joint statement at MC11, calling for structured discussions aiming at developing a multilateral framework on IFD. After that, participants started to submit their proposals and to discuss the structure and elements of the framework. Then in November 2019, in Shanghai, China, a second joint ministerial statement was issued by 98 co-sponsors. In this statement, the co-sponsors committed to work towards a concrete outcome on IFD at MC12. You may note the co-sponsors increased from 70 of the first joint statement to 98 of these statements. Then in 2020, after 2 years of discussions, the co-sponsors announced to launch the negotiation on a compiled text with all submissions of the members, of the participants. Then in April 2021, the facilitator circulated the Easter text, which brought the negotiation into a text-based negotiation. And then in December 2021, 110 participants signed the third joint statement with an attached text, which in some way locks the negotiated text. Then in July, just a couple of weeks ago, we see the conclusion of this text negotiation. So we can see this is a agreement with more than 110 participants. Among them, more than 70 are developing members, including 20 LDCs. So it was initiated also by developing members, and even at the outset of its launch, it was broadly participated by the developing members. And as Ambassador Sofia said, it is called Developed Facilitation for Development. So developed dimension is a key nature of this agreement. So as the Ambassador Sofia just gave some explanations on this, I would add 3 features to interpret our understanding on the development dimension. Number 1, it is designed in a targeted manner for development. In the past decades, many developing members have adopted policies to attract investments. However, while they see investment treaty could be a way to create an active environment, they also have concerns on traditional investment agreements, such as obligations on liberalization and protection. So even at the outset of this initiative, IFD co-sponsors fully recognized that this initiative should learn the lessons from the previous investment negotiations and avoid to repeat the previous failures, both in and outside WTO. With this understanding, the IFD initiative was designed to help WTO members make their investment policies more transparent and administrative measures more streamlined and efficient, instead of changing investment policies in substance, just as mentioned, also mentioned by Ambassador Sofia. In my interpretation, this is a direct response to the concerns of developing members on policy space. Number 2, development dimension was well observed in the negotiation. Paragraph 1.1 objective clearly indicated the purpose of this agreement is to improve the transparency of measures, streamline administrative procedures, adopt other investment facilitation measures, as well as to promote international cooperation as a means of facilitating the flow of foreign direct investment between members or parties, particularly to developing, at least the developed country member parties, with the aim of fostering sustainable development. Also, in order to address concerns of developing members that the commitments in this agreement may lead to additional commitments or change of existing commitments in areas not intended to be covered by this agreement. Vice versa, to prevent spillover effects of IIAs, such as umbrella clause or MFN clause, clear lines have been drawn to give a clear cut on any possible spillovers in this agreement, such as such firewall clauses can be seen in paragraph 2.2 and its footnotes, and also in paragraph 4.1 and 4.2. So with such clear languages in this agreement, we believe it will greatly address developing members' concerns, and also could be a confidence building, especially when they have internal conversations on participating in this agreement. Number 3, implementation in according with development level and capabilities. It just mentioned also by Ambassador Sofia, modeled on TFA, flexibilities are given in the agreement as self-designated on time and capabilities in 3 categories. Category A, day 1 implementation, LDC's 1-year flexibility. Category B, implementation is self-designated time schedule. Category C, transitional period with capacity building. In fact, this agreement is acting as a platform to mobilize needed experience and resources to help developing members, in particular LDCs, for implementation. Based on the comprehensive SNDT provisions, participants have highlighted the importance of investment facilitation needs assessment to assist developing and LDC participants. The WTO and other 7 international organizations have already completed a need assessment guide for the agreement, which would provide a basis for assistance in identifying the implementation gaps. Actually, for such kind of need assessment, even for non-participants, they can also ask the Secretariat of WTO to help them to assess their gaps in implementing such an agreement. So that's a kind of show inclusiveness of this negotiation. So compared with unilateral efforts to facilitate investment, the benefits of this agreement, especially for developing members, including LDCs, are, I will quote what the WTO Secretariat summarized. 1, creating clear and consistent global benchmarks for investment facilitation. 2, anchoring domestic investment facilitation reforms in shared international commitments. 3, providing a global forum to promote best investment facilitation practices. 4, linking multilateral investment facilitation reforms to members' ability to implement them, allowing developing and LDC members to receive the technical assistance and capacity building support they need to implement and benefit from the IFD agreement. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much. That was a fascinating walk through the agreement, a little bit of the history, also very much highlighting, what is out of the agreement and should not be a concern. Let us move to now some our discussants and Hamid. I think you're ideally placed to tell us a little bit more, about the agreement itself. What's the scope, what's in and what's out. Why do we have it at WTO and others? Happy to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much, Cristián. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity to also look into how this wonderful initiative developed and where it's going. But let me start first by congratulating Sofia and Ambassador Park, who's not with us today, for their stewardship and successful landing of this great initiative. And I think I would look at it as a very, very important first step for the natural role that the WTO should play in the space of international disciplines on investment. Now, we've heard from Yihong the chronology of the different steps. I think these were an excellent couple of slides that summarize the history of the process. But let me follow that history from a substantive perspective in terms of the substantive evolution of the subject, because I think there may be some insights there that would help us look into the future. This whole thing started actually, I remember reading a paper written by our friend Carl Sauvant, whom I'm sure we all know, in 2016. calling for multilateral disciplines on international investment, but also facilitating investment. And I remember that paper, it's quite a while now, but it had different elements, but investment facilitation was one of them. And then we got into the Chinese presidency of the G20 in 2016. I think that was a very interesting point, because I remember I went to Nanjing to present a WTO paper on trade and investment policy coherence. And this is where the substantive conversation started about the imperative of coherence between trade policies and investment policies. But I remember during that discussion in the Trade and Investment Working Group at the G20, and I think Jonathan was there as well, we actually tried to make the point that it's not just the imperative of coherence between the two policies, but also there is a reality in the WTO of a legal overlap between investment disciplines and trade disciplines in the GATS, the Services Agreement, where Mode 3 covers FDI in services. And therefore, members needed to take note of that existing overlap. So it's not like trade and investment rules are compartmentalized in isolated bubbles. That wasn't the case. Now, afterwards, the discussions went on, and then in 2017, we started the dialogue. Actually from that conversation that took place at the G20. Now, the substantive evolution of the subject led to a group of developing countries saying, well, we need to promote and attract FDI to our economies. And at the time, the great work that was done by James Zhan and his colleagues in UNCTAD through the World Investment Report informed actually a lot of those conversations about the declining trends in FDI flows to developing countries and LDCs, and how that was the lifeblood for growth and development in their economies. All that actually nourished the conversation in the WTO, but then we formalized the dialogue, not formalized it, but institutionalized it. There is another problem here with the WTO deliberative function that I will come to in a minute. But then all that sort of developed in the direction that was explained until we arrived at this point now, where we're looking at how to integrate this framework into the WTO legal structure. This is another conversation which I think would merit some focus, but that's not what I'm focusing on now. There's a lot to be said, and I think we had an FMG conversation about this previously, but it was more from a theoretical perspective. Now we're looking at it in a much more operational way. But then we've arrived at this point where the substance of what has been discussed has materialized in this framework, which I consider to be a critical step in the right direction for the WTO, which would hopefully lead towards more expansion of the role of the WTO in the space of international rules on investment. Now, I look at this now and say, okay, this process was successful in spite of all the trouble that has been facing the WTO so far. We've been talking a lot about WTO reform, and I cannot see this process in isolation from the conversations that are taking place on WTO reform. Now, this process has succeeded at the deliberation phase, when we started the informal dialogue and then the structured discussions and then moved into negotiations. You see that there was a movement from the deliberative function of the WTO to the negotiating function, in spite of the dysfunctionality that these two functions of the WTO are suffering from. This initiative succeeded into navigating through all those difficulties, and supported and championed by developing countries. And I think this is a wonderful thing to happen. I hope we can capitalize on this momentum. And I hope that there will be a sensible link between what has been happening here and what should be happening within the space of discussion on WTO reforms. Now, this is not going to be also isolated from the question that Sofia has pointed at, the next critical step, which is how to integrate this negotiated outcome in which more than 2/3 of the membership have invested time and effort and political will. How do you integrate this into the treaty system of the WTO and respond to the aspirations of developing countries and LDCs? And we've heard how critical this is. I look at this with a lot of optimism, but I think we need to look at it in an analytical way and hopefully raise the voices about what kind of WTO we want and how an initiative like this should be welcomed and supported rather than resisted. And when I think about WTO reform, I also look at Alan and I'm sure he would have something to say about this as well. Now, I can talk about this for a lot more than you would want me to say, but let me stop here and I look forward to the discussion afterwards. So back to you, Cristián.
I mean, thank you very much, and I think a perfect segue to go to our next speaker. Two things that you mentioned. One of them, of course, was the G20 guiding principles, which were really led or heavily influenced also by the work of James and UNCTAD. So I'm sure, James, you can develop a bit on that. And the second one was that paper that Carl Sovan authored actually for at the time the ICTSD and the World Economic Forum, which was heavily I think fixed on investment facilitation. And I think this was something important that the conversation at that time started to move, of course, from rules to investment facilitation heavily, and this allowed that actually we ended up with the sufficient trust that we could talk about this, without leaving the other conversation outside. And fast forward 5 years, and we ended up landing here. And I wanted to connect this with James because actually, also James was one of the people that were heavily influencing and pushing for us to, at the World Economic Forum at the time, to really focus the conversation on investment facilitation. So definitely also to his credit. So James, if you can also provide a few comments.
Thank you very much, Cristián. It's great to have you to chair this meeting. And also, it's a great opportunity to share the perspective regarding this wonderful achievement. And first of all, congratulations to the co-chairs and to WTO and also to the members, that including China driving the process throughout. So I thought that I agree with all that has been said already. Perhaps what I can do to comment is to see from outside WTO perspective, what else that I can bring in terms of global context and in terms of way forward. I thought some of you may have read my kind of short article jointly with Matthew of World Economic Forum that we published there, to see that the investment policy making is entering a new era. And this new era is really going into the sustainability oriented investment policy making. And there are 3 epoch-making events happening and is going to happen. One is, of course, this WTO Investment Facilitation Agreement. The agreement itself is not just for WTO, it's for the investment community, defining the common language. I would see it in the area of investment facilitation. I won't elaborate on that because it's already said. The second is the promulgation of the global rules on sustainability disclosure, and that's the IFRS International, we'd call it ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, on the it's 2 weeks ago issued the 2 sets of global standards on the ESG and global standards on climate disclosure. So these 2 will form the global baselines for multinationals to report on their performance, and that will have impact on global value chains, including the supply chains that impacting on not only the first tier, but also second tier and third tier suppliers for the global value chain. And that's 2 sets of rules are backed by G20 and particularly by the 6, that is the EU, Japan, Canada, China, US, and UK. So that formulated a kind of core group. And now this week, IOSCO, International Organizations of Security Commissions, endorsed this 2 sets of global rules, and IOSCO basically has the membership of over 135 jurisdictions, and they are determined to go forward with these sets of global rules or global standards, and that will impact on the upstream of the investment chain, that is financing. So in the future, you will see that the capital markets will use that, and investors will use that as a kind of guidance for allocating resources to multinational companies financing their long-term investment on downstream. So that's the kind of milestone this year, and the rules will be, the standards will be implemented starting January 2024. And the first batch of reporting will come out in the middle of next year. And the third one is global tax reform will be implemented again also January 2024. And that will impact on multinational companies. Not only that, but more important, it will impact on the incentives schemes of hundreds of countries when they use that for investment traction and investment promotion. So, and for that, this minimum corporate income tax at 15% will really implies that over 100 countries will change their investment incentive schemes and investment promotion strategies. So if we put the 3 together overall, they are towards the direction of sustainability, sustainable investment promotion. Even for tax reforms, basically is to put a stop to raising to the top of incentives race among countries, wasteful incentives. So these 3 putting together will see starting January 2024, that investment policy making is indeed entering into a new era, focusing more on sustainability. So WTO achievement is part of that. I can see it all depends how we play with it. That's what I wish to emphasize, my second point, meaning the way forward. Regarding the 4 ways forward put forward by Ambassador of Chile, the co-chair, and also I see from outside perspective that what is more important is implementation, meaning how to translate this sets of principles or what do we call it, the provisions into the policy practice and at the national level. And therefore, capacity building, technical systems, and the facilitation of countries in adapting their existing regulatory framework. I mean, some people say, well, it doesn't involve much of the change of the laws, but there will be, in my view, for quite a number of countries to change their regulatory framework in terms of regulations, rules, and administrative practices and institutional setup. So that needs a lot of help. After all, I can understand the importance of integrating this agreement into the WTO system, be it in Annex 1 or Annex 4. But at the end of the day, that's a process. The end of the day, I would say it is translating this into national policy practices. That is the key and the ultimate goal, I would say, and that serve the purpose of attracting investment for sustainable development. So implementation, I wish to emphasize among the four as a top priority. And this implementation process itself may build further consensus for the WTO integration. I would say that out of this 110 countries signing up to it, quite a number of countries need their domestic process in one way or another. Maybe it's related to the legislative process. The other is that interministerial coordination, collaboration for implementation. So that needs to be translated. I mean, the agreement needs to be kind of really brought to the attention at cabinet level for collective decision on implementation. And that is challenging, important. Now, the second issue of way forward beyond what has been discussed so far is to look at this kind of synergy issue. I would say that, of course, there are challenges of integration, challenges of implementation, but there's also challenges of systemic synergy. That is not, it's beyond the WTO issue, it's more of in international investment, overall international investment system, or that international investment regime. Why do I say that? We all know that investment facilitation is one of the 5 core components of investment regime, be it national or international. It's like a car. If you have 4 wheels, this is one of them, and then you need to have the transmitters to link the 4, and then to make it work together. The current agreement is very well done in terms of cover-outs, in terms of creating comfort zones for membership. And it is also very well done in terms of insulating some problems from the existing systems. But the system's under reform, and there are also a lot of good parts of the system. So how to create a synergy is a challenge. On one hand, you isolated itself. It's isolated itself. On the other hand, you need, when you play on the ground, be it at a national, international level, you still need an interface, whether it's a market access, or whether it's kind of entry, or whether it's a protection, whether it's a promotion, it's a dispute settlement. There's an interface at the national level. So you have to step back to see how we can get that interface done to create a synergy, rather than to have a state agreement stand on its own in isolation and to play its own role. It may not work at the national and the regional level or an international level. So we still need to face that challenge to figure out how to do that. So to make this agreement truly conducive and effectively conducive to the overall international investment regimes reforms and the better functioning for sustainable development. Thank you.
James, thank you very much. Really fascinating remarks. And I think you've put up a topic which is of the essence, right? Which is how this is going to water down actually to regulations and to domestically in terms of facilitating investment. You brought excellent examples. I think how the global tax reform will actually modify the way in which over 100 countries implement incentives. You talked about climate disclosures, and of course you talk about ISSB, but at the same time the SEC in the US it's evaluating them. In Chile they're already obligatory, through the Commission of Financial Markets. So the question is, okay, let's go now to investment facilitation. How will this framework, of course, which will be incorporated through international law, but how will it actually water down into domestic legislations and into domestic practice overall? And I think this is, this has been discussed through the conversations in the agreement, but in the end, what we're seeking to do here is investment facilitation, right? And the organisms that are tasked with facilitating investment normally at the domestic level are the investment promotion agencies. So it's very important then, of course, at the implementation level, domestically, and the representative of the investment promotion agencies will actually be, absolutely on board and in full knowledge of the development of the agreement, so it actually can be implemented also in practice. I have a number of queries, but let me perhaps, since we are on Swiss time, open it up to members and to our dear guests to see if there are comments or questions, or otherwise happy to take a few myself. And Lou, you got the prerogative of being, the owner of the ball.
Yeah, thank you, Cristián. I hope you can hear me now. I got a few questions. It's really a kind of follow-up to what already has been discussed here. The first thing is that the Investment Facilitation Agreement says itself that it aims to become a multilateral agreement, so which means that to include all members. So it will be interesting to learn from Sofia or Yihong or other probably participating delegation here. How are you going to engage those non-participating ones, including not only a few LDCs or developing countries, but more importantly, US, which is not part of this yet, and also India, and if I'm not mistaken, South Africa, who still have a kind of concern about the new initiative like this. So that's first thing. The second thing is that James made a very good point that this needs to be implemented. So before it becomes multilateral.
Lou, we lost you now. We lost you at this needs to be implemented. Maybe if you turn off your camera.
Are we going to implement this? I did. Can you?
You're still on. We still can see you. We cannot hear you. The other way around, we work perfectly. Okay,
Cristián, I will send you by chat my question, and you take the others. Okay, I'll stop here. Yeah.
Perfect, but at least I heard that of course one of the goals of the agreement is for multilateral application, and there's a query about how to engage some of the countries which are still not on board, such as the India, South Africa, and the United States. So that's one. I will love the speakers to just write that down and then take it as well. But let me get a few others before I go back to them. So next on my screen is our dear Jonathan Fried. Jonathan, you are muted. Oh, Jonathan, you.
Let me, is that all right? You should be able to hear me now. No?
We hear you, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Let me thank everyone. Very comprehensive when you add all the perspectives together. So it's a comment woven into a question, picking up where James finished, which is ultimately, if the goal is to foster sustainable development by way of marshaling private capital and public capital across borders, then it is all about the domestic environment. I wonder if we're being a bit too WTO-centric in our discussion. James, under his leadership, has done a remarkable job with UNCTAD's annual meeting of export promotion agencies, with investment policy reviews, and so on. And ultimately, with all respect to the WTO and its technical assistance division, the assistance and guidance that's needed to help developing countries grow into a more hospitable environment needs to marshal the resources of UNCTAD, the MDBs, as well as bilateral donors to help make this happen. Maybe the co-chairs or the commentators may wish to comment on whether the discussions are encompassing or anticipating some interinstitutional coordination to help make this a reality. And just as a footnote, I did put into the chat the investment principles. They're very short, but remarkably comprehensive in their coverage going back to 2016, in acknowledging the respective roles and responsibilities both of the investors and their claimed rights, the sovereign rights of the recipient country, and the relationship between investment regulation and investment facilitation. So 7 years later, I think we're still being guided by that G20 work. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very clear. Perhaps let me take one more from Alan, and then we can go back to our speakers, and then we'll take Peter and Victor and whoever else would like to jump.
Thank you very much to our speakers again, and kudos, congratulations to all those involved in driving this process forward. Underlining what Hamid had to say about how to bring this into the WTO formally. I'd be interested in further reactions and forecasts in that regard. My feeling is, with respect to the WTO, either it adapts or it will become irrelevant. And we saw there was a way forward, the JSI on domestic regulation of services. This one maybe has a good chance of multilateral adoption, but to what extent is the way forward for other subjects? Is this a way forward for other subjects, which has a trade facilitation aspect, agreement aspect as well? The WTO is, the GATT is largely about constraints on member behavior. And this agreement and TFA seems to be more on the positive aspects of how do you conduct yourself without necessarily having any penalties attached to crossing a line into forbidden behavior. I'm in the school of the just do it aspect, which may not be necessary for this one, but may be necessary for others. In other words, Azevedo, during his second term, one of the major positive things he did is he said, I'm going to back the JSIs. I'm going to give secretariat support to the JSIs as I would to other endeavors, despite opposition. There's also there are complaints in the Budget Committee about China's contributions to various funds around the organization, although they are totally in line with the objectives of the organization. So 2 questions. One is this workable for other subjects? And another is the degree of constraints in this agreement as opposed to positive, an agreement to positive behavior. Are there things that you cannot do as a result of this agreement? Thanks again to everybody who presented this morning.
Very clear. Thank you very much. Let me perhaps we can go, through our speakers, and you don't have to take all the questions. And if you have any doubt about it, please ask me, and take the ones that you feel you should address, and then we'll pass it on and go to the final set of questions. Thank you, Ambassador. Maybe we can start with you.
Thank you very much, Cristián, and thank you very much to those that have made very, very relevant questions. Well, I will address some issues that have been mentioned. Of course, we are very aware that the implementation is key, and that's why we are working on a scheme under which having technical assistance and capacity building. We have to remember that this is a different situation in that sense than the situation with the TFA, because this is not a multilateral agreement at this moment. So here we will need the involvement of more different actors, donors, international organizations than in the case of the TFA. But we are very, very decided working on that, and that's one of the 4 pillars in which we are going to work especially after the conclusion that we had this month, because it's key. Implementation is very relevant. And that's very much related with something that I want to highlight too, that of course, for some members, for some participants, the implementation of this agreement will be easier than for others. Of course, some participants, they have already high standards related with investment facilitation. So much of the content of the agreement they already have. But what the research is showing, and that's very relevant, is that the gap is especially for developing and LDC countries, and for them will be also the highest gains of this agreement. So that's very relevant for us, especially in this moment, because we have seen, and this is also reported by different institutions, especially UNCTAD, for example, that the poly-crisis that we have been living have affected especially the investment flows to developing and LDC countries. So this is a very timely agreement which will have will produce special gains for LDC and developing countries, but of course they have the highest gap in the sense of implementation, and that's why again technical assistance and capacity building is so important for us. And finally, I have listened various opinions related with WTO legal framework, incorporation, and of course that's something also very relevant. We are going to look at the best strategy about that with the participants, especially in the second half of the year. But I think, and this I will say as ambassador of Chile and not as the chair, but I think at the WTO we need a broader conversation about plurilaterals in the sense of how, because they have been working in a very efficient way, and some of you have mentioned domestic regulation, but I can mention also e-commerce, and we can mention also the informal dialogues on gender, on micro and small enterprises. So they have been working very efficiently, but a little bit like a parallel world at the WTO. So I hope, as Chilean ambassador, that in the context of the reform discussions, we can look at, in a broader way, not only for IFD, how we can integrate this parallel track with the regular multilateral work at the WTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and you addressed, I think, one of a question that I think went through our three the three persons that took the floor, which was and Lou also sent me this question that we couldn't pick up, which is really about funding, right? And how are we going to, while this agreement goes multilaterally, how are we going to fund the capacity building part, which is going to be key to help developing countries and LDCs on implementation? And Jonathan also touch into this, and also Alan. Maybe DPR Lee, you can take it next. Some of this question.
Yes, thank you. First, thank those comments, views, and also questions. They're really very helpful for us to have our work move forward. So, talking about the multilateral agreement, this is actually an issue we discussed since the very beginning, that with the JSI, how to have them incorporated into the WTO agreement. There have been a lot of debates there. But for us, on the other hand, it's very clear that the first thing we have to do is to finish our negotiations. And in the meantime, to have more people to join these JSI initiatives. So if you recall those milestones I presented just a few minutes ago, I indicated some the number of participants in those joint statements. You can see that I have to say quite each time there are quite a lot of increase in those co-sponsors. So actually that's has always been our priority in parallel with the negotiation. So now we are enhance our efforts, even on the outreach. And there are, you can see from the number itself, there are about around 50 members not participate in this agreement yet. So actually, among participants, together with the two facilitators, this is our priority, and we have tried to give assignment to relevant participants to focus on some members to have their participation soon. So currently we have some members already showed great interest in it. So we are expecting that more to come, and then as a majority of them are developing members, we will have great interest to have this agreement and need it. So when we come to the end of the day, to be frank, it is very, we feel it's very difficult to accept that if members want to block such agreements with development dimension, and a lot of developing members, including LDCs in it, they want to use this agreement to improve their investment environment, to attract more investment, to achieve sustainable development. So we really don't see there's any reason for those to block them. But on the other hand, we see that in the end of the day, probably there could be a few members that they are not in the position to join for whatever reasons. So in that case, as Ambassador Sofia also mentioned, also this should be the part of our WTO reform, while we insist on consensus decision-making, but considering the current 164 members, and they have different development level and different interests, and how to make breakthrough in negotiations is also a challenge for us in the current WTO negotiations. And so maybe no matter, so for us, if in the end of the day there are even very few members who are not in the position to participate in this agreement or any other agreement, then no matter we are talking about the Annex 1 or Annex 4, there should be some further discussions and maybe some new understanding or interpretation on the existing articles in the WTO agreement. So that's we see that is a thing that we cannot avoid in the next step for reform discussion. So, but anyhow, for this agreement, just like China at the very beginning emphasized, this is a pro-multilateral agreement initiative. We always regard this IFD, JSI, is a pro-multilateral. So in this regard, we still want to work towards that objective. And while, as I said, while we continue to enhance our efforts to outreach, on the other hand, we also have to have this such kind of discussion, how to incorporate JSI into multilateral as part of incorporate JSI agreement into WTO agreement, a part of our WTO discussion, WTO reform discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me go directly to Hamid and then to James, if you can take it back to back so we can speed up a little bit, and then we'll take more questions.
Well, thank you, Cristián. I think the question of integrating the agreement into the WTO architecture is going to be subject to a lot of discussions. And there are too many technical details here I don't want to get into at this point. But I think one point to keep in mind is that JSIs are not the same in terms of legal integration. Domestic regulation is not a new standalone agreement. It's actually scheduling new commitments under a pre-existing treaty, which is the GATS. E-commerce, they haven't made up their mind yet about what kind of legal shape they want to give the outcome. Here, we have a new standalone agreement, and I see completely this difference between, or the choice between Annex 1 and Annex 4. And to be honest, and I think I've discussed this idea like more than a year ago or 2 years ago. We go back to the working assumptions of the negotiations as they were launched. One of the working assumptions is, of course, to have this open-ended to all members. And another assumption is to extend the benefits of this agreement to all WTO members, even to those members who don't undertake the obligations. Now, the challenge that I see with Annex 1 is that Annex 1, by definition, asks non-participants to undertake new obligations. So the 50 members who are out, haven't participated, if the agreement were to be integrated into Annex 1, it means that they will have to undertake those commitments. Now, that, of course, is going to be a challenging proposition. On the other hand, on Annex 4, the question is going to be whether you can get consensus on the integration of the agreement as an Annex 4 agreement that binds only participants and does not create rights for non-participants. And of course, the politics of fragmenting the system and all that would come into play. So the question here is there a different way? Now, I can understand you start with Annex 1 and say, we're for multilateral agreements. But failing that, what is Plan B going to look like? And I think this is something that requires more discussion. There are ideas out there. We've discussed them before in the FMG. I have written a paper on that, but this is not the place to discuss it now. It's just highlighting the point that this is going to be a conversation that has a few wrinkles to unpack. So thank you, Cristián.
Certainly, James, please.
Thank you, Cristián. I think I'm just respond to the question by Jonathan regarding what UNCTAD or international organizations can do in terms of helping developing countries in implementing or following up of this agreement. I thought here maybe some of you are not aware that there is an existing collaboration mechanisms for all major international organizations on investment. And this is called World Investment for Development Alliance. It was, the membership includes World Bank, OECD, World Economic Forum, UNCTAD, WIPA, ITC, UNIDO, ILO, UNWTO, and the WTO is an observer to this organization. And there are also others, Academy of International Business, that has a network of business scholars, over 10,000 in over 100 countries, and also UNCTAD. So this alliance was established at the World Investment Forum and in 2021, formally launched in 2022 at the World Economic Forum, and I've been chairing that and now turning it to as a rotation to the chair of World Economic Forum, and it will continue with World Bank, OECD. That is a mechanism, what we call the working together for promoting investment for sustainable development, and we do coordination. We collaborate on events and on programs at both kind of among the members or collectively, either ad hoc or collectively, that we have a plan on that. I thought that could be a mechanism for the technical assistance. I see the challenge of funding is, of course, we all need funds for that. In the meantime, all these organizations have their mandate to work in the area of investment facilitation, investment promotion for sustainable development. So they will do it from their perspective, but how to really buy them in it's a question to the co-chair and to WTO, and how would you like to get us on board as a world alliance to work together and to support. So that would be the synergy potential. That's how we can help. And I agree with Jonathan that the G20 guiding principles is still impactful and may be helpful to bring those major countries that are not yet on board of this agreement on board. That includes those countries that you know who they are. In fact, if we look at Ms. Li's the time frame, there were several parallelly kind of process going on at that time. 2016, we had a G20 guiding principles that was agreed, but in 2017, when there was German presidency, in fact, the major agenda item of the trade investment work stream on investment was G20 Investment Facilitation Action Package. And that package was negotiated with the participation of the US, India, South Africa, among other G20 members. And I was facilitating, I was asked by the G20, by the German G20 presidency to facilitate that negotiation. And that package was agreed on investment facilitation. If you compare that package, I had 16 versions, but for the last version that was agreed language after the midnight, that was in Berlin. That is an interesting phenomenon that people may not know, be aware of that. I think Jonathan may know because he was participating in the process and leading, even co-lead throughout the process. For that, it was because of the failure of the trade parts of the negotiations. Therefore, it did not, the investment part was supposed to be a package. It couldn't find its way to the G20 ministerial and upwards to the summit. So there are things which are interesting and useful. And the UNCTAD Global Action Plan for Investment Facilitation is non-binding, of course. That was endorsed by the Trade Development Board of UNCTAD. So that's a full membership. So there are things that could be helpful as bases and elements that can support for that. My question is, this is maybe to Hamid with the institutional memory and also to the co-chair. When you try to get those which haven't been participating in the negotiations to be on board, if they request for the revision of the current package, what are you going to do with that? They say, well, we'll participate, but it changed one sentence. I'll just change one word, and that will change your package, consensus package. Are you ready to reopen it? That will be the implication for, I guess, for quite a number of members, WTO member states who are not members and would like to be member. Thanks. Back to you, Cristián.
Thank you, James. Why don't I propose this? Ambassador, I know you have another commitment in a few minutes. So maybe I will, since this James call on both probably you and the institutional memory of Hamid, and I'm sure Yihong also. We'll give you the floor to say, try to answer that and say a couple of final words before we have to depart. We have pending questions. We have the permission of Lou to stay for another 10-15 minutes. So we'll go with you, and if other members and guests are keen, we can stay for another 15 minutes or so for our last round of questions. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Chris, and for giving me the floor again. Yes, indeed, I have to leave in a couple of minutes for another meeting. Very sorry. But yeah, well, about the last question related with what will happen if a non-participant wants to participate but wants also to reopen the text. Well, I think, or what we are thinking as co-coordinators is that, well, first of all, this is something absolutely new, in the sense that, and I think Hamid also said that even if under GSIs we have right now different examples, they are of a different nature. Domestic regulation, you can schedule. In the case of e-commerce, they are still negotiating the text. So this is something new. This is also different to the core procurement and the couple of plurilaterals that we have already at the WTO rulebook. So because of that, because of this novelty, what we want is to think and rethink about how we move, about the strategy, about how we advance together with the participants. So in that sense, we have tried to be very inclusive and to have these conversations already with the participants. We are going to resume at the end of August with some meetings with ambassadors, and then we are going to have another round at the beginning of September. And one of the issues will be how we advance related with illegal incorporation. And of course, those kind of scenarios can happen, very likely. So that's something that we need to decide with the participants. And last, well, I just want to say thank you, because we are very, very happy for every opportunity that we have for outreach about the agreement to all delegations, but also to the academic community, to the civil society, to the experts, because we are very proud about what we have right now and what we have achieved. We are absolutely convinced that this agreement is very positive for development, especially in these difficult times that we are living at. And because of that, we are very, very committed with the process, but we also are very aware that we have very relevant steps in front of us. So we are very happy to share what we have, but also what we need to do with the community interested, because of course we will need all the brains and all the support that we can have to move on with this, for us, very, very, very relevant agreement. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much, and I will liberate you now for your other commitment, and of course it's at the core of what we see here at FMG to steer and to try to promote the multilateral system. So we're very much in line with. We're very, very happy to be able to serve as another one of your channels. Let's again, the proposal is to go for around 10 or 15 minutes, and we can go through the questions which are pending, and maybe get another round from the discussants, and we'll wrap it up. If we can ask that we can do this a little bit faster, so we really liberate people by 4:40, 4:45 though, Geneva time. And maybe we can start with you, Peter.
Thank you. In fact, Lou asked my main question, and a lot of it's been answered by several people, including Hamid. And so what I'd like to do is to move forward from that a little bit and briefly. But before that, it's a pity that Ambassador Boza has gone, because I was going to start with a plea to make the text public, because she said, thanks to the academic community, to civil society, happy to share with everybody. But there's nothing that anybody outside the group can do if the text remains restricted. And I really don't see the purpose of keeping it restricted. It really should be made public. Now, my main question, following on from the discussion about the process, and I might be a little bit unkind here, but deliberately, because I think we don't need to underestimate the problem. I think that because this was a joint statement initiative amongst plurilateral group that are like-minded, relatively speaking, and can see the benefits that we've heard about, it's actually been easier to negotiate the text than to deal with the next steps. Because for the next steps, whether it's multilateral or plurilateral, there are going to need to be consensus decisions amongst the WTO members. I don't see that India and South Africa have dropped their opposition to plurilaterals. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there are things going on behindhand, but there is a reason why they haven't joined in. There's a reason why the US hasn't joined in. So making it multilateral, if you can, would be easier, but it's not going to be easier to make it multilateral. And to deal with it plurilaterally sounds like a nightmare. And as someone who blogs about this and communicates about this, my question is it realistic to raise expectations that this is going to be a done deal anytime soon, even before MC13, perhaps by MC14? Is it realistic to raise expectations that this is going to be a done deal soon?
Very clear, Peter. Thanks. Victor, you're next.
Thanks, Cristián. Thanks to friends participating in this fascinating debate. I've been listening to all. Two quick comments, one on the structure, and the reply to Peter's question is, no, it's not realistic. It's going to take a lot of time. There's two types of non-participants in the JSIs. One type is people who basically don't care but would not oppose, and then we have those who fiercely oppose this. And so it's not going to be an Annex 1, it's not going to be an Annex 4, we know that. So some new type of solution will have to be found, and it depends on a vision of the WTO for the future that members might or might not have. And here, let me commend Alan on his new book. I'm making some free advertisement for you, Alan, Revitalizing the World Trading System. Great things to have us discuss there. I would, in terms of taking this discussion forward, advise, if I may, those who are participating in discussion to focus on two issues. One, Hamid already mentioned, is MFN or not MFN, and two is dispute settlement. What type of dispute settlement do you wish for these types of agreements? And this is going to take time. So not for MC13, I'm afraid, Peter, this might take a little bit longer. I would be interested in having another discussion at some time in the future with Alan and others. What does just do it mean? Second issue, I was fascinated by what James said, how to implement this relationship with domestic regulation and how this relates to sustainable development. Just to remind, there might be countries discussing some issues which are not focused on trade facilitation, but rather on investment facilitation, but rather on how do you screen your investment. This is a big issue in many countries now. Do we let any type of investment come in, investment in technology? You all know what I'm talking about, and it's not only in Europe and in the United States. I have been participating in some small group discussions in my own country about investment screening. Do we let any type of company be bought, any type of critical infrastructure, any type of exploitation of critical raw materials be in the hands of any country? Big question mark. And this has to do with technology, as we know. So that is another trend of discussion that I think needs to be aired. Thank you, Cristián.
Victor, I think that will merit a whole different discussion on another day. In terms of FDI screening, there are currently 27 countries with an investment screening mechanism on M&A and about 9 countries on greenfield. So just those numbers tell you that there's a lot there today. Let me go now to Brad.
Thanks, and hello, everybody. And it's been a great discussion, and I really like the initiative. I just wanted to focus briefly on one fairly narrow angle to this, and that's being maybe a bit hopeful about Hamid's ambition that this becomes really a first step towards something more for the WTO. This comment is really not about looking back at what we already have in front of us, but this is about then forms of cooperation that we should be looking at. sort of picking up what Jonathan said and James's reference to an interface. And as the group is now thinking about how this integrates into the existing legal framework, and then especially if it becomes more ambitious over time with these additional steps that Hamid refers to, I think it's also going to become very, very important that this integrates well into the international legal framework, right? So when we look at the GATS, say, the outcome of the text there has references to other legal commitments of WTO members and other organizations, including in the IMF, and there's an explicit mention of the IMF role in capital flows, IMF role in exchange restrictions and multiple currency practices. When the MAI was being negotiated, these sorts of things were also a topic for discussion and takes a lot of detail and technical experts in the room to work these sorts of things out. So I just sort of lay it out there that we will need to, I think, keep in mind that as this agenda hopefully grows and becomes more it becomes more integrated, that we're going to have to also be thinking about these avenues of cooperation as well. That's it. Thank you.
Sorry, I could have went lost. Thank you very much, Brad. Let me go now to Egypt, Ahmed.
Okay, thank you very much. And my name is Ahmed Diab, and I'm DPR, head of the Commercial Affairs section in the Egypt mission to the WTO and the UN. I actually have been following the discussion, and I'm very, very much delighted to be among this group of experts listening to the distinguished speakers explaining, putting together their ideas and through their presentations, and of course the interaction with the comments and questions. It's really again that Ambassador Sofia had to go. I wanted to congratulate her and of course the coordinators and the members for having concluded the negotiations on one of the, I believe personally, one of the most important steps forward in terms of building the whole context or for what James called the sustainable investment policies. My question, and maybe everybody's aware that Egypt is not a member of the GSI. We're not one of the 110 members who have concluded the negotiations. But I was sitting behind the screen listening to what they had to negotiate and the points they had to put, I mean, in the context of the negotiations. And the question that popped to my mind was very simple, and maybe Mr. Hamid maybe touched upon the point of whether this is going to be a multilateral agreement or a plurilateral agreement, and maybe something else in between, we don't know. The question simply is, why would I become member of an agreement which would apply to everyone? Why should I get committed to something when I could be a free rider? If this is going to be one of the scenarios or the scenario that is going to be applied at the end of the day. This is a question that I received from Capital. Why would we join this agreement if we could benefit from, because actually I read the agreement and I saw that there are provisions on non-discrimination, on the most favored nation treatment, and of course, again, the firewalls that this agreement contains with respect to how to really, is this going to be affected by other international investment agreements and provisions. The second question is, well, I've become a member, and there is an understanding and a footnote that says that nothing here is about market access and nothing here is about dispute settlement. However, the text of the provision on dispute settlement is kind of like not clear in a sense. It opens still the door for some sort of complaints that could go beyond, the provisions of this agreement could be used under, other agreements. Firewalls are not there to prevent this from happening the way they intend to be. So like those are my two questions or comments that I wanted to raise today. Maybe some questions, some answers or explanation from experts. Why should we as non-members become members to an agreement where we can be like easily, simply free riders? This is number one. And if there's something that would put us at ease, like an explanatory note to answer some questions with respect to the nature of commitments or with respect to the applicability of the dispute settlement provision, it could maybe help us if the proponents are going to socialize the agreement after the summer break. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful idea on the explanatory note, and I had seen that Dr. Alejandro Jara has sent up, then down, then up, and on the question of why should members not free ride, I think, and I mean then multilateralists like you maybe can come in.
Well, thank you, Cristián. Fantastic discussion today. Just very briefly, I just wanted to make a comment, but and it's more or less in the same vein as the representative of Egypt here, because it seems to me, and I stand to be corrected, that regardless of what the participants of this agreement define in terms of the implementation, whether it's going to be on an MFN basis or not, and collectively or individually, and regardless of the manner in which this agreement is integrated into the legal framework of the WTO, plurilateral, multilateral, whatever, regardless of those formal definitions, which are very important, it seems to me that by the nature of this agreement, the nature of its provisions, that de facto, the application of this agreement will be done on a non-discriminatory basis. I think it's very difficult for this kind of provisions to be applied on a preferential basis. Maybe with the exception of that some will have, the participants will have the right to use dispute settlement to enforce their obligation. But besides that, as a matter of fact, like other agreements in the WTO, this will be done basically on a non-discriminatory basis. Am I wrong?
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Of course, we're past time, but let me see if we can go with James, with Hamid, and with Yihong Li for maybe 3-4 minutes each. That would be great. So we can wrap up at 4:50 or so we can liberate the rest of you to continue the day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cristián. Quick responses. I think starting with Alex, I think what he said is absolutely right. It's very difficult to apply those obligations on non-MFN basis. And therefore, there is no free rider risk. In other words, this is like trade facilitation. You cannot facilitate for some and then unfacilitate for others, particularly since you're talking about transparency and simplification of administrative procedures. You can't discriminate when you apply these kind of regulatory reforms. Back to what the Ahmed Maghaouri's question about what are the benefits. Now, if I get the benefits anyway, why should I be a member of the agreement? And I'll say there are three benefits that I can identify. The first is, and this applies particularly to developing countries and LDCs who have participated in this initiative in order to attract foreign direct investment. So signing an agreement like this saying, I will be transparent in accordance with those obligations, I will simplify and speed up my procedures in accordance with my obligations. This would be a very, very important sign in building confidence in the domestic investment environment, which would help the ultimate objective that participants are aiming for. So there are benefits in signing on the agreement from a self-interest point of view. The second is for developing countries and LDCs also to get the kind of assistance and capacity building that would be needed to introduce the regulatory reforms they need in order to implement the agreement. And the third is having a coherence in the approach to investment facilitation, which goes along the lines of what James was talking about in terms of the benchmarks. We're aiming at having a coherent approach to investment facilitation that even goes beyond the WTO. So starting with the WTO, I think would be a good start. But one last thought I'd leave with everyone here is that this is going to be a test for the WTO. Investment facilitation is important, of course, But this is going to be a test for the WTO, as Alan said. It's either to adjust and evolve or we'll lose relevance. And thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. So back to you, Cristián.
That's fantastic. Maybe James, if you could take it shortly for a few minutes, and then we'll give the final word to DPRD. You're muted, James.
I think getting back to Victor's early observation of the dichotomy of investment policy making at a stage. On the one hand, countries intensify their efforts to promote facilitated investment. On the other hand, they strengthening their screening and monitoring mechanisms. So the dichotomy is looking very striking now in terms of screening. Now there are 37 countries, looks not a large number of countries, only 37, but they account for over 70% of the global FDI stock, 70%. So that's quite big. And then the annual screening of getting, as a result of the screening that stopped investment projects, is roughly about 5% of the global FDI flows. And that sounds not very big, but a lot of investment intentions and the plans were shelved, foreseeing that there would be difficulties in passing through. But interestingly, what happened last year and this year is that investment promotion facilitation measures increased, reversed the trends of the year before. That, as we know, that since 2010, that there has been significant increase of investment measures in the direction of restricting or prohibiting investment, and then that reached the stage of 2021 that 52% of the investment policy measures put in place in that year were in the direction of discouraging or restricting investment.
Right.
And then, but interestingly, last year and beginning of this year, that close to 70% of the investment measures newly introduced are in the direction of promoting investment. So this is all of a sudden happening in the other way. Having said that, as I said, the screening is a big issue, as Victor has highlighted, and that will continue. I think smaller economies are starting discussing what they do. The key issue is that you see this. My observation is that over the past, both advanced countries and developing countries have this kind of regulatory models. For advanced countries, it's more of post establishment regulation. They use competition policies and other policies to deal with investment, while developing countries use a pre-establishment model to regulate investment rather than post. Now they are meeting in the middle. Both use the hybrid approach. So that's why you see a lot of industrialized countries moving towards the pre-establishment regulation model, while developing countries are still moving towards the direction of liberalization, but then strengthening the post. That's just an observation. I think Alan's observation is very interesting. That's what I feel also, that this IFD is using positive language to guide behavior rather than restrictive language to do that. So the language-wise is more of best endeavor, but it is trying to design in a way of mandatory. So so that's a kind of interesting phenomenon, and I don't know how the state-to-state dispute settlement mechanism kick in on this positive legal language in terms of obligations. I mean, when you get into the details, that could be another challenge, I'd say.
Thank you very much, James. Super interesting. And I think one thing I will add on the screening part is that as you see countries that have very restrictive regimes and want to liberalize, they tend to also bring in screening mechanism, which in the end will probably not achieve the objective, because they may liberalize, but then they're going to keep the restriction through screening. So I think it's very interesting to say how it develops on there. DPR Li, please, if you could just give us a wrap up. Thank you.
So, thank you. So with the, I try to answer a couple of questions there. First, about the text to be public, make public. I guess it's because we are just finished the negotiation, and we are going to legal scribing soon. So I don't think that at this moment it is time is mature to make it public, but I agree that we should have it public to as early as possible. So of course I will convey that message to the facilitators. So, and with regard to the comment that whether it is easier to deal with the text, the next step would be more difficult. I fully agree that would be more difficult, because in the end, it is a GSI that people have the common interest there and like-minded, that sometimes negotiation could be easier, though it is not actually easier, but compare those next step to those who oppose this kind of initiative, maybe it would be more difficult. And with the questions from my good friend, Ahmed from Egypt. Actually, talking about free rider, I guess some of others already touched it. You should look at the nature of this agreement. It's talking about investment facilitation. So it helps your government to improve your investment environment to attract more investment. So if you are the country that investment abroad a lot, then you needn't worry if you don't worry about the inward investment. So maybe it's okay to you, but I don't think we talking about free rider. I really don't know where you get free rider. And so even talking about previously, we have the ITA negotiations and also EJ negotiations. Of course, that could be a kind of free rider that others reduce their tariffs, but you don't. But on the other hand, there are other products will not go into your market, and it will have negative impact for you to better integrate into the global supply chain. So, again, it depends of if you are the exporter, you just export, you never import, and you can get a free rider. But if you want import to join the supply chain, then you have the problem with your high tariffs. With regard to the concerns raised by Ahmed on the dispute settlement mechanism, in my presentation, I mentioned that actually it's an issue also raised in the negotiation itself, so that we have the very clear language there, as I mentioned about paragraph 2.2, together with its footnote, and also the paragraph 4.1 and 4.2 to set a very clear cut there to avoid such a spillover happens. So that's why we call those articles are the final words. So I really encourage Ahmed to have further discussions with us and to raise your concerns also from your capital. So anyhow, I really thank the opportunity. It is a very good opportunity for us to listen to so many views there, and there's very good suggestions and also food for thought. And here I also would like to plead you to help us to introduce this very good agreement for the development, and to others to have them all join us, and so that in the end, though again it's very difficult as I said, but I really would like to have this to incorporate into the WTO agreement as a multilateral agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone really for a fascinating discussion. I'm sure that one of many as we walk towards MC13, and as many of you said, implementation way beyond that. I will leave you with maybe one question that we also need to address going forward, is that as negotiators, and my case, a former negotiator, right? We tend to dwell around, of course, the implications for countries, but investment is a little bit of a different game, because we may have the most beautiful framework, ever, but we also actually need to get investors interested. My question here is also, when is the agreement, and where going forward? This also works with that component, right? When the investor goes to Hamid's office, as an advisor, and tells them, I've heard about this new investment facilitation agreement, and I will want you in 10 minutes tell me what actually is going to do for my company, and why should I go to this country who's implementing better than the other, right? So I think just a food for thought that we also need to put the question of finally the one of the key players in the agreement also within the discussions. But with that said, and again, many thanks to all our guests, and it was really an honor and a pleasure on behalf of FMG to host this discussion, and very much looking forward to see you soon on our future events. And of course, as we walk this support to IFD towards MC13. Lou, I believe you normally wrap up. I don't know if you want to say a couple of words. And again, thank you for the invite.
No, I will skip it for the time since my connection has some problem. I know we already done excellent discussion. So thanks to you all, and see you next time. Yeah.
Of course, now it sounds perfect. When you didn't want to speak, it worked fantastic. But that's again. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.